The last poll I saw in Arizona was late July. Harris was up by 2. I'm sure it is within the margin of error. It shows economy and immigration are top for voters in Arizona. They are like that in a lot of places. So as you know and talk to voters there, what's the kind of message they're looking for? What are the concerns you hear that they want a president to fix?
First things, economy, housing, immigration. And right now, there's kind of a honeymoon period for Kamala Harris. The Democratic base is fired up here like never before, something we haven't seen it in years. Younger voters are fired up, according to a recent poll that shows Kamala Harris ahead by 3 points, again, within the margin of error. But once again, Arizona is a toss-up. So I think there's a lot of kind of waiting, when will this honeymoon period end, and when will she address those 3 specific issues? As we heard a minute ago, there's a new ad out talking about Kamala Harris now embracing the toughest border security bill in decades that stalled in Congress, largely because of Donald Trump. Democrats have a hard time defending what she's done over the last several years with this border portfolio she was given. They immediately default to that bill that got stalled that Donald Trump wanted to be stalled. So that's how immigration is going to play out. She's going to have to answer questions, though, in news conferences, interviews, specifically about what she did and how the border got to the place it's in right now. The economy and housing may be tougher issues at the federal level, but certainly the economy, inflation is a big deal here. Phoenix was the hardest hit city for a while there with rising inflation. So that really matters. And I think there's a lot of waiting for answers to those questions.
So, Tim, let's talk a little bit about the border, because she has taken probably some of the hardest hits on that issue, right? The president of the National Border Patrol Council went after her yesterday at an event in Chandler, Arizona. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say.
Harris refused to implement any of the policies, programs, or operations that were given to her that would have addressed this issue. That is extremely frustrating, especially now that she is going to try to redefine herself. She had the policies. She could have implemented the policies that fit within her parameters, and she refused to do it.
So, Tim, how does she answer that? And frankly, as someone who worked on campaigns headed by 2 women, does that complicate things in any way?
Yeah. Well, look, the Border Patrol has endorsed the bipartisan piece of legislation that would surge resources to the border, that would lead to a reduction in trafficking in fentanyl. And Donald Trump is the one who tanked that. I would also say that we have seen a rapid decrease since the executive order from the Biden-Harris administration, extremely low unauthorized border crossings, record lows in June. And so the administration has taken action on that. I would also say in Arizona, you have a bunch of border city mayors who have endorsed her regarding this issue. You also have Republicans in the state who have endorsed her regarding this issue. And you see in the advertising that they're up with today, look, part of her history is that as Attorney General, she prosecuted transnational gang members. So she has a record to run on, and she's forward-looking about the solutions here. And I think that's what's important.
So, Bram, Senator Mark Kelly obviously did not get the job as Harris's running mate, although a lot of people had a lot of reasons why they thought he should. What's the feeling there in Arizona about the fact that he didn't? But also, do you think he can be a significant factor in helping her for November?
He definitely can be a big factor, especially when it comes to the border. He's been pretty tough on the Biden administration in the past. He said when Joe Biden wanted to get rid of Title 42, it was, quote, a dumb move. So he's a pretty straight dealer. He's in touch with a lot of these border mayors, the border communities behind the scenes. He's not flashy. He's not the kind of speaker they may have wanted, the kind of attack dog they may have wanted for, the number 2, the running mate position. He certainly... He's not up there with a Shapiro or a Waltz as a speaker, but I think he can offer a lot of credibility. I'll add that among organized Democrats, there was somewhat a sense of relief, because if he had been elevated to the running mate job, if Kamala Harris won the election in November, there would have been an open seat in the Senate up for grabs in Arizona in 2026, a midterm election. And Arizona Democrats were a little leery about their hopes, their chances of keeping that seat in 26. And I'm sure national Republicans, Chuck Schumer probably was also a little leery of that as well.